Hi guys, it's Ed. Hey, today I'm going to do a video about my BX or Old School Essentials Let's March a Style D&D campaign. And before I get into all of that, I just want to share that I've been really giving the Old School Essentials books a lot of run for their money. I've been using them every day, flipping through them, referencing them for monsters and treasure, and rolling different things up out of them. And man, these bindings have held up incredibly well. These are very quality books, especially compared to many of the things that you run into out in the world these days. But let's talk briefly about the West Marches style game and how that's going to work. Basically, I'm going to invite a core group of friends and then probably another dozen players to play in an online game where they'll all have access to a bulletin board system, message system, file system, where they can communicate and share information, and also coordinate their own adventures. All right, so I'll be kicking off, to get things started, I'll be kicking off a couple of coordinated ventures to get players going. But after a certain point, the agency will be on the players to decide what they want to be interested in, what they want to accomplish, what works best for their schedules, and come together as a group, try to gather as many people as they want for their mission, and then get in touch with me with a couple of different possible times for play, and then we'll make it happen. I'm going to be doing this in a 10-week season, and after a season of 10 weeks, I plan to take about a 3-week break to retool and recharge and get ready for the next season. Let's see. This is all going to take place in my Warholds of the North setting. I've been working on this for a long time, and especially heavily over the last 2 years, I would say. This is a map of the current play area. It includes the Kingdom of Ostvik here in the center, and the Kingdom of Morgwyn to the northeast, Skirga to the southeast, the northern section of the Goblin Spite Mountains, which includes part of the Lost Kingdoms of Mithril of the Dwarves, an area called the Northern Whistling Death Forest, and the Kingdom of Freider to the west. Also a big area called the Spearmark, and the southeast corner of the Kingdom of Svordheim, which is sort of the most powerful kingdom ruled by the High King. This all kind of was spurned by kind of an old school style that I wanted to do, so I got into doing these maps. For those of you who don't know me, many of you do know me, so you know this is kind of the thing I'm into. But I got into doing these maps, which are very old school style on grid paper, and I think these are going to lend themselves really well to running this kind of a campaign. As an example, I do a lot of things out of journals now, and I've been pulling, over the years, I put all of my campaign information, kind of streams of consciousness, into a bunch of different journals that I carry with me to games, and they weren't really organized in any particular fashion other than what I wanted for the next game session. And so over the years, that made a very chaotic and hard to search through bunch of resources. So I've been pulling all of that into a much more organized journal system. And I'll be using these as my DM tool for running the West Marches game. This is my Book of the North journal. And it breaks out each section into 20 by 20 mile grid maps. So you'll have like a starting area within Central City where you'll start, an inn in particular and a few blocks around it, which will be considered kind of a safe zone. And then from there, you'll go out into the world, which may get progressively more difficult as you travel further and further away from your starting area. Although a lot of that is driven by the terrain and what's going on in the world itself. So I ran with some ideas shared with me by Frank Metzer. Hey, Frank. I think at the very first or second GaryCon some years ago, where he showed us how they were using terrain like dungeon levels. So if you were moving from an area of fields in the wilderness or roads into like woods, you'd be moving into a more difficult area, like moving into the second level of dungeon. And if you then went into the hill country, well, maybe that was jumping all the way up to the fourth level of dungeon, which back in the old days was pretty darn dangerous. And I remember we took a shortcut through the hills and ran into a vampire, which actually really obviously kicked the butts of my character and some of the characters in the party, and we had no idea what we were dealing with. So it has some of that going on in it, where there's difficulty is driven sort of by the terrain that you're exploring. Fields and roads and areas that are cultivated and close to civilization are less dangerous than light woods or hill country in more settled areas. Whereas when you get into the deeper forests and the more remote hills and the swamps and things like that, things get progressively more dangerous and themed, of course, for those areas. So you'll run into monsters and creatures that fit into the setting and are for those kinds of areas of terrain. So I'm not going to put up these here a lot, but all of these maps already have a lot of detail in them as far as set encounters, areas that are described in some detail as far as different woods or lakes, villages and farmsteadings and that sort of thing. And then many set encounter areas where you might have an orc warren or a troglodyte camp or a bandit camp or that sort of thing, and how that all fits into the setting. And it's already written up, and it goes out for quite a ways. So I won't belabor this a whole lot further, but I think this book has something like 25 20 by 20 mile maps that are complete and ready to play. It also has detailed maps of several of the cities of the different kingdoms, and then each city has, because I love making maps, maps of the different buildings, chapels, palaces, towers, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, you get into all the various different dungeon levels and that sort of thing. And keep in mind, this book here is where I'm pulling all these disparate maps that have come from other books or some new material that I've been adding in. And so there are lots and lots of other materials scattered around in other books that fit into this area. So, you're talking about, over the years, having written up and finished dungeon levels. Just pages and pages and pages of material. Along with that, I've been pulling in monsters and magic items into a dedicated book instead of having them scattered everywhere. And I'm already up to about page 23 of the BX monsters that are made either customized or are homebrew for my campaign. Everything from something called a Wargast, which was the Wargasts were mages in the Necrogarchy of Lang who were fooled into being turned into undead, and Wargasts are almost like the war dogs of the armies of the Necrogarchy of Lang. They used to control them through magic, and have them on these big heavy chains with iron collars around their throats, and then they would release these sort of like a typical gas, but with this heavy armor bolted all over it to charge into the ranks of enemy armies and tear through them, paralyzing people and killing them, and transforming them into ghouls that are under the control of that particular Wargast. And a Wargast can control up to a pack of 10 ghouls that it creates. So ultimately, your legion of the Necrogarchy of Lang, it might have a pack of a dozen Wargasts that it uses like war dogs in a fight. And that pack may end up having 100 ghouls running with it. At the end of the Nightshade War, when the armies of the Necrogarchy of Lang were scattered, creatures like the Wargasts became loose in the world and are now not under anyone's control and are sort of lurking on the fringes of society and in the ruins of some of different places. You've got all kinds of stuff. Different priests and cults with their holy symbols and write-ups for what their NPCs are like. The Coven of the Hags and the Corby, and who are their priests and that sort of thing, who are a really cool group, at least I think. Let's see, you've got strange monsters you've never run into before called the Kindergall, the Dark Heart of the Forest, my own spin on shades, and something called a Witchling, bog bears, which are like bugbears but they dwell in the swamp, and sort of like giant sloths. They have a lot of growth of algae in their fur that kind of gives them a horrible rancid smell and makes it more difficult to fight them. Muck elementals and elven war golems and war machines that are scattered around here and there, that are left over from the war between the elves and chaos many, many, many thousands of years ago. And most of these golems and war machines are no longer functional, but I think there are maybe 2 out there in the entire region which could be reactivated if certain things are done. And of course, then there's the dreaded Swamptopus, which lurks in the bogs and mires, waiting to take down unsuspecting player characters. So I'm going to continue to add to this. I'm sure by the time we start playing in March that I'll be up to 30 or 40 pages of original monsters in here. And then I have this volume, which is where all of my NPC write-ups and wandering monsters and just random tables are going. And I've used a lot of random tables over the year that I've customized for whatever part of my world that we were adventuring in. So I don't just use like the regular old random tables. I like to use mine that are customized for the stories going on in this setting, so you'll be running into things that make sense and are part of the stories going on, but aren't like leading you by the nose. There's no railroading or linear anything. So let's see. So you've got everything here in these random tables, from various kinds of terrain encounters to you might run into a bunch of herbs that are useful for alchemy, and making alchemical brews is something that any player character can learn, and they're very minor in power. But at any rate, that's a summary of what's going on. I'm running out of time here. I'll have another video about this coming up soon. Have a great one. Bye.